Hello and a very warm welcome to everyone. I am Shija Agrawal and you are watching the Mint Startup Diaries. 2021 has been a defining milestone for India's startup ecosystem. With nearly 60,000 startups, about 14 million retail investors, over 250 incubators, and 41 unicorns as of December 2021, there's a massive opportunity to build global businesses in the form of intelligent and emerging tech that could drive innovation and social progress. On average, about three startups are turning unicorns every month, and so India stands close to its global incumbents like China and the US. Now, with more than $12 billion raised alone in Q3, we are in the midst of a whirlwind of activity with investors writing big checks despite changing consumer behavior, a volatile marketplace, and crowded market spaces. This can sort of very surely be owed to the golden age of digitization we're experiencing and the increased internet penetration across the markets. High bets are being placed by investors who see the potential of these startups and believe they can help build great products, exponentially grow, and capture the market. And once it matures, go for the IPO and get grand returns. This all in the midst of major financial losses brought on by the COVID 19 pandemic, layoffs, fragile businesses models, and a looming recession has not been easy for entrepreneurs, and yet Indian startups have continued to disrupt and upend the status quo, seize opportunities, and innovate across various sectors. In fact, I would say that 2021 has also proved that cutting edge technology like AI, IoT, and machine learning are integral for growing sustainability and growth and have the potential to pave the way for enterprises to become lean, agile, and tech driven and make India globally competitive. To talk more on this as the year of review, please help me welcome Anirudh Edamani, who is Managing Director at Artha India Ventures, a family office, Kartik Prabhakar, Managing Director, Chirate Ventures, and Rahul Arora, CEO of Nirmal Bank Securities. Gentlemen, it's my sheer pleasure and privilege to welcome you all. What an year it has really been. And if I were to really sum up my introduction in one sentence, 2021 belonged to the internet and nobody else. I remember beginning of this year having a conversation with a startup founder who called me and who literally was choked with so much anxiety happening. Fintech startup in the business of lending, everything was shut and was on the verge of shutdown. And I had to do this pep call with him, 30 to 40 minutes spending time with him and really trying to tell him that just stay put for a while as much as you can. And that sort of motivated me to do this column for Mint that startup founders don't embrace the fear and move on. And in that piece, I'd actually written that 2021-22 really has the potential to be the golden age of renaissance for the venture industry, given how technology is permeated. And boom, see what? 2021 will go in the annals of history for private markets, startups pre-COVID era and startups post-COVID era. The post-COVID era playbook definitely is defined by the likes of Tiger Global and SoftBank. One doesn't really know what does it really mean to be the VC with the likes of such big funds. The 2021 pre-COVID era startups are now coming into their own in terms of tech IPOs or monetization. It's a great panel. We have diverse views from different stakeholders. My first question, maybe I'll begin with you, Anirudh, and no, not in any particular order, just alphabetically. My first question to you really is that if you were to look back 2021, and if I were to ask you 2021 belong to Dash, what would that really be?
The Indian consumer. I think
Okay, and
I
why would you
think we
say
did it.
so?
I think in many ways why we are today, both in terms of the Sensex, the Nifty. If you look at the startup ecosystem, I think the real power of the Indian consumer has come out in 2021. The economy would have been way worse if the Indian consumer wasn't out there buying things on the internet, wasn't out there consuming things, wasn't out there traveling. I mean, many of the Horeca stocks, both listed and and unlisted, both have survived simply because the Indian consumer has shown up, right? And they've graduated so quickly. We've gone from a offline market to becoming a predominantly online market where incremental sales are coming from online marketplaces, and the Indian consumer has adapted so quickly, right? We keep talking about that our population is not tech savvy, our population will take a long time to adopt things. But if you look at 2021, right, I was just reading some report that in the last 6 months, 99% of Indian pin codes has received at least one online delivery, which is unbelievable, right? I don't think, I mean, all the VCs here on the panel would have ever thought of that eventuality, at least for another 7, 8 years. We were all predicting 2030 mein hoga. But this all happened so quickly. And if this Indian consumer had not shown up, I don't think we would be all having a great conversation as we're going to have about the potential this decade has for India.
Thanks for that. I think it's an interesting viewpoint, and I would sort of get on to you now, Karthik. Very clearly, Anirudh said that 2021 belonged to the Indian consumer. Digitization sort of permeated all across tier one, tier two, tier three, you say it. And all that consumerism also got reflected in the way stock markets reacted, in the way private markets reacted, for that matter. So, what really is your viewpoint if I were to ask you 2021 belonged to whom? I'm going for the internet. Anirudh went for the consumer. What would be yours?
I'll just slightly add one more element to it, which is technology. And what I mean by that is anybody who has embraced technology, has actually won in 2021. And let me just explain with one or two examples. Entrepreneurs who have actually embraced technology and built technology startups, be it actually consumer startups or enterprise SaaS companies, which have actually seen light of the day in 2021. If you take software professionals who have actually taken that route and built their capabilities and skill sets over the many years, they've also seen and reaped the benefits of that in 2021. And of course, consumer, as Anirudh said, and internet has been a big enabler of all of this. But I think at the core, anybody who touched technology, who embraced technology and said, I see technology driving value. And you see that even in D2C brands today. So I think technology has been a fundamental, value add there for 2021.
Okay, Rahul, the last one. Sorry to put you on that spot, but we had belonging to the internet, consumer, and technology. What would be your bet?
So I think there are two ways to look at this, Shrija. One is it definitely belonged to liquidity, because we wouldn't be having this conversation without the underlying theme that's brought out the consumer or digitization for that matter. So I think the fact that so many companies have become unicorns, as you said in your opening remarks, is because of the power of liquidity that's happened. And I think there is, combining what my co-panelists have said, I think there's a change in lifestyle that's been undergone in India. And I don't probably think we're going to revert back to the way things were pre-COVID. I think, in the last 4 years, to just take forward what my panelists said, there have been two seminal events. I think one was demonetization, which began the process of digitization in the Indian economy. And I think it was accelerated at a level that was incomprehensible at the start of COVID, because to even imagine that people would not go to a Zara store and be comfortable buying Zara clothes on the app, and so on and so forth. So I think a bit of liquidity from a capital market perspective, which has helped these companies go public, and definitely the fact that there's a lifestyle change, which underscores both the power of the consumer as well as digitization. And I don't think we're probably going to go back to the old normal, especially with 65% of our population under the age of 35-40.
So that's well said. My entire idea of asking this question was that all of you outlined one element, and we are in the midst of a perfect storm for all of this. See what happens when internet, technology, consumer, and liquidity, all of it combines. It's exactly what we are seeing right now. Too many unicorns coming to the fore, technology getting into its own, liquidity driving valuation of companies, and consumer at the center of it, consuming it and benefiting from all of it. So we are in the midst of a perfect storm, and nobody is denying it. I want to understand that this unicorn obsession that we seem to be having, both from the VC side and the startup side, how self-serving it is, really. I'm sure that the early stage funds like Artha and Chirate would definitely want a Tiger Global and SoftBank to happen, and more so larger and larger funds. But I'm not really sure that it is as pleasant and welcoming as it would have been perhaps 2 years back. While the startups are disrupting the offline spaces, the VCs are having to disrupt themselves also. this has been a tough year for VCs too. I mean, when you have a Chirate Ventures, you are investing in, suppose, a company, and you see a SoftBank or Tiger Global there, perhaps the winner has already been chosen, one would say. So, do you stay away from that company? Do you stay away from that space? How is the VC model reinventing itself? Karthik, I would like to hear from you and then get on to Anirudh on this.
Sure. No, I think there were multiple elements to your question, Shrija. So let me just take those one by one. In terms of what happens when you have large investors coming in, do you stay away from that? Is one part. And another part is in terms of disruption to the early stage ecosystem itself. And let me just take these, one by one. This 2021 has clearly been a year where there is a lot of capital which is available. And the good news has also been that there have been quite a few startups which have come out as well. And it's always been the case where each kind of catch the other. When there is a lot of startups which are deprived of capital is where opportunity comes and there are more funds which come in and vice versa. 2021 has been a year of the entrepreneurs where VCs have been looking at how quickly can I go take a position in a particular space. So in short, I think as long as there is a conviction on a space, and all of us ultimately are playing the long game with a clear knowledge that there are some companies where we may not see the kind of outcome that we expect, and that's why it's an early stage risky bet. But just having that play and dropping off when there's a large pool of capital playing on another company would actually, you lose the bet if you actually are playing on the basis of conviction. And what you said is completely true. If one were to just spray and pray and hope that something works, then you have to be the one where there is a lot of capital as a differentiator. But when you start dissecting that and saying capital is definitely one element of differentiation, but that kind of gives a short-term edge. But beyond that, if there is a very strong product and many other factors that one looks at, I think, and we have seen that ourselves as well, and we have seen that with many other funds, where you have a thesis and a conviction, there are investment positions which are taken, which are away from large pools of capital. But in a medium term, the good companies have always attracted more capital as and when they've needed that.
I don't necessarily agree with you, Karthik. For example, I'll give you today's headline: Razorpay. Give me just example. Fintech company. But its valuation increased according to the media reports 7 times. What really happened in 1 year from $1 billion? I mean, they are now valued at about $3.24 billion in 7 months. So your valuation has increased 7 times to what you were previously. And so when you have raised a large round of funding from a larger fund, it means you can spend more, you can hire more, your marketing can be so much more, your talent pool is so much bigger. So the winner has already been chosen. So the gap between the number one and the number two becomes so much higher. So capital is definitely the moat in the most sectors that I'm seeing. You see it in the D2C space, you see it in the fintech space, you see it in the edtech space, yeah, Byju's. The gap between the number one and who is the number two, if I were to ask on this panel, who is the number two edtech player in India? Would we know it? I don't know. We all know the number ones.
No, let me answer that question. I think what you're referring to, Shrija, I completely agree. That's actually a very different game. And that's a late stage opportunity where capital plays a huge role, for sure. And I think when you actually differentiate, because the quality aspect that you're looking at as an early stage investor is very different compared to what you're looking at a late stage, where you're actually, by and large, the leader of the pack is already discovered. So when you look at the early stage, you have multiple companies which are broadly at the same stage, and just capital alone will not make a difference there. But in terms of the late stage, I actually agree with you. The leader is already known, and you're actually extending the gap with capital. And that's where I think there is a huge difference in the way a late stage investor looks at it versus an early stage. And I'm not an expert on the late stage.
Okay, Anirudh. So I think Karthik has taken a step back, saying that I can't comment because I'm not expert in the late stage. But how do you think? How do you see this phenomenon playing out in the family office spaces? I'm sure the number of approaches that you've had from startups to raise funds must have phenomenally increased, because I think what this entire IPO phenomenon has also done is that now everybody wants to be an entrepreneur. And the minute, and I have seen this, there's a famous saying in capital markets, and Rahul, you might agree with me on this. The minute the panwalas start talking about an IPO, you exactly know that's the time when to step out of the markets. The similar thing is happening in private markets where everybody wants to have its own startup and everybody thinks that's a ticket to the IPO now. And that's what this entire unicorn frenzy has done. So I'm sure a lot of requests coming by your site, Chirate's site, so many startup desks, the busiest year ever. So how do you retain sanity in these markets?
I think the to start with, the Anwala phenomenon has actually hit the crypto market before it's hit the private market, right? I still haven't got any startup advice from my Panwala, but lots of crypto advice from him, right? But coming back to the topic, and I think you also alluded to it, because I agree with Karthik in the fact that in the early stages, India is there are many competitors, right? And at the early stages, a large round, at least in my last about 10, 12 years of being in this space, I've seen that if you have too much money at a very early stage, it actually works counterproductively, because you stop innovating, right? Because remember, scarcity is the mother of innovation. And at very early stages, I'm not talking about where Razorpay is, where you're raising a Series E, F kind of a round. I'm talking about when you're pre-Series A, right? If you're raising a seed plus a pre-Series A, Series A kind of round, if you raise too much capital, right, it actually works against you, right? Because what happens is if you have too much capital lying around, right, you're not going to innovate. You start hiring more people, you start doing more marketing because you're forced to spend that money, right? And I think Karthik, we've all seen this phenomenon in 2016 when many of these very early stage companies got 2 million, 3 million, $5 million checks on a single phone call or within 24 to 48 hours, and they plastered the entire Bombay city and Bangalore and all these places with all their hoardings. And if you go back and see how many of these companies still exist today, right, I think there's a write-off of almost 80-90% in that portfolio. Now, at the very early stages, you have to be very clear. India is a very clear at growth stage, number one and number two kind of market, right? You yourself asked the question, after Byju's, who's second? Nobody knows. But let me ask you, if you talk about radio taxis in India, after Uber and Ola, who's number three? Who's number four? Do we even remember the names? Meru was first to the market, but nobody remembers Meru
Absolutely.
today, right?
Yeah.
Nobody remembers Mega Taxi and all the other guys. If I ask you about online shopping, there's only it's Amazon and Flipkart. If I ask you about makeup, if you want to buy cosmetics, it's Nykaa and Purple, right? If I talk about online cloud telephony, it's Nolarity and Exotel. Now, if we don't remember, I think we have a memory which is a little different than maybe other countries where we only remember the top two. And what happens in India is once you cross that chasm of a Series A and you're a very clear market leader, you start getting more and more capital thrown your way, right? Because now
That's
all the
exactly what
growth
I'm
stage,
asking.
yeah.
That's exactly
But
what I'm
that's
asking. So this number one and number two has been fueled a lot by the VC money too, Anirudh. That's what I'm saying.
yeah.
So
But
it's a
it's
winner takes
I
all
think it's a
market in a lot of
yeah,
spaces.
because even the Indian consumer is telling you the same thing, right? I mean, who wants to travel by Meru today, right? I mean, if you landed at Delhi airport or Bombay airport, would you ever open an app to look for Meru, right? We always look for Ola, Uber, or the third would be that Kali Pili or the local taxis that are available. Nobody opens up. It's the Indian consumer is telling you that I am willing to back the top two guys. The third guy doesn't make any difference to me, right? And that and if the consumer is telling you that, how can the VC, especially the late stage guy who's trying to back the number one or two guy, remember their ability to fail at an investment is much lower than the ability that Karthik and I have. Right? We have to be right maybe 2 out of 10 times. They have to be right 7 out of 10 times. It's a huge difference. So they unfortunately cannot back the third guy, right? Because if they do and if he doesn't do well, there'll be a lot of capital getting written off in a late stage fund.
So what spaces are you guys targeting then? Suppose if the
I
winners
think
have been
Karthik has something
picked.
to say.
Yeah, Karthik, you wanted to add something? Yeah.
I just want to add to that. Invariably, if you actually track what has happened over the last many years in India, When that number one, number two start getting identified, Shrija, that's when you start seeing the number three per se kind of emerging as a new sector. If you take, the same online commerce as Anirudh mentioned, you have a Flipkart and Amazon, but what is the new segment which has come up, which is social commerce, and you have a Misho there, which has come up as a number one. And similarly, if you take any sector, you talked about edtech. There is a Byju's and there is probably a Vedantu. But then there is a whole stream of STEM learning companies which are coming up, which is a different segment altogether. So effectively, if you slightly broaden that perspective, in my view, just adding to what Anirudh was saying, what actually is happening is this is all creating a market. It's actually forming markets. It's not a zero-sum game. As more and more companies are getting formed, more and more subsectors, which would otherwise be non-needle movers, are becoming a prominent enough sector for early stage players like us and Anirudh to actually go and invest in those. So there are new companies which are forming up. So it's actually expanding our market. And that's a great phenomenon to happen for the ecosystem.
Okay, so I think I would sort of let's flip the question. We spoke about the defining trends for 2021. We started with this huge surge of liquidity, the consumer at the center, the VC model being disrupted, and both of you unanimously are choosing to say that that's a late stage capital game. Things are better off at an early stage. So there is not much competition at early stage. There's much pool of supply that is happening, the startup supply, and you guys don't feel pressurized to put capital to work. Is this enough diligencing happening? I'm sure all of you will say yes, because I'm asking you. But do you think that sanity is existing right now, because there's so much competition to put money at work, right?
I mean, I think, especially as registered funds, right, or even family offices, we obviously take a very serious look towards due diligence, right? And so a typical time for at least for us has been from the time we sign a term sheet to the time we wire out money, roughly about 90 days to 120 days, right? And that's simply because many of these early stage companies that come to us, they haven't, they usually will have some sort of legal and financial DD issues that crop up. So it takes a bit of time. I think I'm a proponent to find a way to make it faster. Unfortunately, India just has too many laws that conflict with too many laws, and that leads to too many issues. But if there was a way to make it faster, I'd like to see this happen in 45 days. But however, to your point, whether there is competition, yes, there is competition. Of course, there is competition. But I think today founders are, especially the second time and third time founders, they are more careful of who they want on the cap table. It isn't like maybe what 2012 or 2016 was like. The color of money is the same regardless of where it comes from. Today, when you have a check from Chirite, you know that there is over 125, 130 companies worth of portfolio behind it, and there's a lot of connect that could happen because you are connected to the Chirite portfolio, right? The same thing, if you're looking at Artha, there's a different flavor of an investor here. Each one of us has our strengths. Each one of us has our blind spots. But what overall, the founder now has the choice that, listen, do I want capital that just comes in, is dumb capital sitting there and not really, providing me anything beyond what is a check? Or do you want a professional investor? Do you want somebody that will, get into the business and start helping out and accelerating things and making the whatever money is being put in feel like 3 times more than what it is, simply because of the effort that is being put in behind that money? I think that choice, I don't think the founders had it before, but they have it now.
Okay, I'll come to you now, Rahul. You have been quiet for a while. You heard both the VCs talking it out and talking about competition and liquidity, competing with late stage funds, or perhaps not competing with them and finding their own niche in the spaces that they operate in. My question to you really is that whilst you're talking about the subject of liquidity and VC, one of the other defining trend that really happened in 2021 was this: a lot of these technology companies, they IPO'd, right? And earlier, perhaps the narrative really was that to go for the NASDAQ listing, perhaps the appreciation of technology companies is higher on those markets, because there was always this thing of association with loss-making companies. And India historically has been a market where investors or perhaps the retail consumer are more appreciative of companies which have a steady stream of revenues and perhaps profits too. So are you, and with these spate of companies which have done reasonably well on the IPO front, can we say that the Indian consumer, the Indian retail consumer, has become much more intelligent, has become much more sophisticated? Or perhaps who is this new Indian retail consumer then?
So I think 3 or 4 points, because I think when you're looking at a company which is going public, it'll be very different from when Karthik or Anirudh are looking at it, right? Because uh, the point is that when you're taking a company public, the shareholder thought process and time horizons and how they view it, whether they view it as a business or a stock, is going to be extremely different from the way these two gentlemen view it. And that's just two ends of the spectrum. I think what's happened, which is fairly interesting, is to a large extent, I would call it the westernization of valuation, if you will, because if you take a look at, say, a Paytm or a Nykaa or a Policy Bazaar, with the exception of Nykaa, these are all loss-making entities. So, if I go back 2 years, nobody really spoke about price to sales multiples or gross merchandise value or things like that. Because to a lot of these companies, even EV to EBITDA does not come into being, because EBITDA is at a loss as well. So while they would have incubated their investments at a very early stage, I think that the biggest discussion we have, and you raise the issue of Razorpay, we spend the better part of our day talking to our clients in Hong Kong, Singapore, and India, trying to have this conversation of Paytm versus Razorpay. So I think what happens is the theory of relative valuation comes into play in a very material way, you know but I think, Shrija, we need to just take a step back and be careful. If I just take you back 13 or 14 years, when DLF listed, right, there were not too many Indian listed real estate companies at the time, and DLF was the largest issue if the Indian capital markets back in the day. I remember reading reports that were projecting profits 3 years out for DLF, the kinds of sales they have not done in a single year, right? So the 3 year out projections for profit is something that DLF has not done in sales in a single year. So what happens is that there is a life to these things. You ride the wave while you can, and of course, liquidity has a very, very important role to play. Now, we're sitting at a time when the US central bank is saying they're going to raise rates 3 times next year. Probably India is going to get into a cycle of raising interest rates. The Bank of England has done so. All of these conversations could be very different 1 year down the line, Shrija. It may not be very different from what Karthik and Anirudh are looking at. But if you talk to me and my institutional investors, who are more interested in the price that their shareholders, whether they're endowment funds in the US universities and things like that, where the accountability is far, far more because it's public money, it's a very, very different conversation. So sometimes I get worried. It's fantastic that a lot of people who've got ESOPs are also branching out, cashing in on them, and becoming entrepreneurs. But there are cycles, and in my 20-year career, I've seen this come and go many, many times in different sectors. And sometimes we joke that the market tops out when too many of these things happen. And lo and behold, you had the Nifty at 18,500, just about a quarter back or less than that. And we're not going close to that right now. So while we're talking about all of this, Shrija, let's not forget that the largest issue India has ever seen, which is going to be the LIC issue, which nobody really knows the size of it, is going to come out. So a lot of your, IPOs that are in the fintech space and otherwise are probably going to struggle in the fourth quarter, because investors are going to have only that much money to put in. The quantum of money is finite. You have to decide where to put it in. And when you have the largest insurance company in India coming out, the kind of success that you've probably seen in the first 9 months may or may not get replicated here on is my sense. So I think it's also about when you look at a company in its life cycle, from incubation to listing, who your shareholders are. And I think in many ways, like I said, I think we're sort of imbibing a Western way of valuation, where we've moved beyond asking questions on return on equity and return on capital employed. But these things can change very rapidly, Shrija. If the Nifty is down to 14,500, trust me, the first stocks to be sold will be the loss-making ones, and you'll go back to the conventional, the way of valuing companies. So, I mean, it's depending on which side of the bed that you wake up. But I don't think Warren Buffett is his philosophy is dead just yet. He's around, and I think his way of thinking is around. Ride the wave, I mean, like they say, you
Thanks.
always remember a 100-meter sprint winner. You never remember a marathon winner.
Thanks for that, Rahul. Interesting viewpoints here. Also, I think I like this entire idea what you mentioned about the westernization of valuation. That's a great segue to what I wanted to ask this panel also. We spoke about quite a few things, the liquidity, connecting with VCs, the VC market being disrupted. We spoke about tech companies making IPO. So, what about the valuation playbook? Have we deserted the traditional valuation playbook for good? Looking at valuing companies on essentially, and also asking questions on profitability. Also valuing companies when there was path to profitability seen. Increasingly, the answers I'm getting when I talk to VCs is that it depends on the startup when he or she wants to become profitable. It's about chasing growth or about chasing profits. And perhaps the lever in most part is in the entrepreneur's hand. And when you're looking at a larger market share, perhaps the new playbook is that it could be loss making. And I see more and more investors, that perhaps more and more PE investors also being comfortable with this playbook. So has COVID-19 and 2021 codified this new playbook for startup valuation? Maybe Karthik want to take a stab at this one.
Sure, sure. No, thank you. This is a oft asked kind of question, especially in these times. But I'll tell you my belief on this. I firmly believe that the loss making part is, and I agree with what answers you're getting actually, and I'll just dissect that and just give a little more explanation to that. When we look at loss making, I think it's important to see at what level is the loss happening and where is that capital going. Is the capital going as an investment for future growth, or is the capital going as an expenditure which is not resulting in growth? And if you take the same public markets and take the same technology markets, there are many companies which are profitable but are actually growing at 15, 20, 30%. And there is a space for those companies as well. A large part of companies which are in the startup phase, and which is where VCs are investing by and large, are actually looking at capturing that next set of companies where fully aware that some of them may not see the light at the end of the tunnel, are looking at companies which are able to grow much, much faster. And is that capital going to fuel that growth? And we've seen this in the e-commerce days as well. Are you looking at least a unit level economics where there is a contribution margin after you sell? If there is a product being sold where the cost of the product is more than the price of the product, that's the I would say the lowest level of lack of profitability that you need to be very cautious about. But if there is a profitability issue at a much later level where you're actually recovering everything, but you're actually deploying a large part of that to fuel future growth, that's where the promise of future value, let me put it that way, is. And that's where a lot of private capital is going after, chasing that potential outcome.
Yeah, so another want to add to that, and I think where I'm coming from is this entire Zomato IPO. I mean, look at how the common investor took to it. I mean, loss-making company, and like how, not small numbers, talking about mammoth losses there, and they seem to have. It's kind of a cult phenomenon now because you seem to be investing in a WeWork, you seem to be investing in a Zomato, also because people tend to have that branding associated with it. You order from Zomato every day and you want to be part of that story. So perhaps that also played in that favor. But talking from a financial perspective, how sustainable these companies are in terms of quarterly earnings, being micromanaged by analysts from a quarterly, like Rahul and his team would be after these companies, buy rating, sell rating. We saw how Paytm really was. People actually thought that could really break the bubble or burst the bubble. But then you had a phenomenal Nika IPO. So perhaps this appreciation of technology IPO is coming to its own in the Indian ecosystem, in the Indian retail investment ecosystem.
Yeah, I think obviously, while I agree that there is maybe a bit of westernization of the Indian public markets taking place, but truly, if you start looking at some of the valuations that exist on the Nasdaq compared to what we have in India, I think we're much saner, right? I think what we might be looking at. I mean, I think companies like Twilio, companies, these things are trading sometimes at 50, 60 times sales, right? And I don't think Zomato is close to that as far as the last time I remember seeing it. However, what Karthik says is extremely important here, right? I think companies that are companies that are profitable on a unit economic level, right? As they grow in scale, they will hit profitability in the future. Now the problem arises if the companies are actually negative on a unit economic level, which means that the more they sell, the more they lose, right? And those kind of companies will always have trouble. I think whether they are big, small, or huge, like when what we saw with WeWork, right? They were losing so much money per square foot that it didn't matter what kind of mathematics they did, right? It's going to come back and tell you that there is going to be a loss and there's going to be a big hole at the end of this, at the end of this transaction. And so public market investors will sort of have to test this out, right? Whether a Zomato will be profitable in the future or not, I think that is not a question that I could possibly answer, because a lot of that has to be answered by the management. But however, I do see that the Zomato services and the Zomato brand name today has a lot of value, right? Today it would be very difficult for someone else to go out there and compete with a Zomato and Swiggy and try to outdo them at their game, right? So I see a very long and good future ahead for Zomato. I think they've got some great subscription revenues coming in from Zomato Gold. They have a fantastic business with restaurants. When that turns into profitability, I think that's a question that the management has to answer. I'm sure many of the times they might be saying they can turn to profitability anytime they want. However, at least in my experience, it's never been that easy, right? Once you start deep discounting customers, it becomes very
They
difficult
get
to come out of that. Yeah, because they'll never come back, right? I mean, look at what happened to Groupon, right? Groupon was supposed to be this amazing big unicorn. Bazi, I think in India was something very similar to it. And once you got customers hooked on to discounts, right? What they want is more and more discounts, right? And if you start reducing the amount of discounts, right, then it becomes very difficult. You start alienating the customer who's actually coming to you for a very specific need, the need for discounts, right? And I think in the longer run, some of these companies will have to emerge and see if they can actually start increasing prices on customers. I think, and especially the Indian customers, very sticky towards their prices, right? So, could be an interesting one to see how it works out in the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, so thanks for that. I think that's exactly what we were trying to understand. What I'm understanding from both you and Karthik, that for both of you, it is not that phenomenon. It's not that playbook. You would go with profitable unit economics, profitable margin, and that is what is the kind of startup you would want to partner with. Is it what I'm understanding?
Yeah, I always want the customer to pay. See, the customer has to pay for a bit of the growth, right? I don't think that VC can completely fund growth, right? That's what I'm saying. That if there's a positive unit economics, it means there is something flowing from the gross profit pool into what is what the investments are being done towards growing the company and accelerating the pace, right? And the customer can only pay, and like Karthik said it, if they're paying a little bit more, or whatever, a bit more than what the product or service costs to get it delivered to them. If that is not happening, the customer is not paying for any of the growth. And if the customer isn't paying
Okay.
for any of the growth, you shouldn't be growing.
Okay.
And
So now
I'll
I
just
think,
say slightly
yeah.
different, just to add to that, a slight different perspective there is I would actually still be okay, even if it is that lowest form of lack of profitability, which is you're actually acquiring consumers by spending money. But there is a thought process and a conviction and a thesis on when that will stop in a very finite time period, and we may go wrong there. For example, companies where you're possibly there's no revenue, but you're actually acquiring consumers and building up a community. You will not see revenue for a short period of time. But there is a certain thesis involved that once the community gets to a certain level, and it could be different in different business segments, you will see that it becomes monetizable. In some cases, we may fail in that thesis. It doesn't work. Then obviously that doesn't see the light of the day. But in the long term, I think it's very important for unit economics to be there.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, I mean,
Good to
just
hear
agreeing with
from
that point.
VCs. Yeah.
It's good to look at burn as sprints and not as marathons, right? If you can't run a marathon without drinking any water along the way, right? You need some water along the way, but maybe you can run 400 meter dash without water along the way. I think that's what I agree with that as well.
So perhaps can you burn your way to startup success? Perhaps there's no clear answer, yes and no. It's a mixed bucket. Perhaps in the shorter term, yes, but the longer term, the winner will always be the one which has a stronger unit economics and a clear path to profitability, and perhaps a stronger business model where you have the customer paying for you. I think we are getting towards the end of the conversation. Such an interesting conversation so far. Now let's talk about when will the music stop, really. Increasing signals from the Fed on where we are. We had a very benign liquidity environment. And so there are two parts to my question. 41 unicorns in India, no matter whatever digitization happened and all of that. But what really warrants this? Like, really, I have covered the space for so long. I knew these companies like last to last year, they were at Series B, and now we get releases saying it's $1 billion valuation. So do you think that too much of hype is for real, it's warranted, and it is not liquidity driven? That is the first question. So let me get an answer to that, and then I'll get the second one. I'll begin with you, Rahul. Which club are you in? Do you really see so many startups getting into the unicorn club and so soon? How much of it is really liquidity driven? Where you think liquidity is playing a very, very strong part in it?
No, so Shrija, I think the music will stop at some stage. This won't continue indefinitely. To take Anirudh's point forward, I do agree that, in some cases, valuations may not be as exorbitant as they are in the US. But if you take a look at Zomato, for example, since you spent some time on it, it's a 1 lakh crore market cap company with about 3 or 4,000 crores of sales. So it's not that in the Indian context, these are very cheap companies. They're almost at 30 times sales, and these are not valuations Indian companies have seen. I remember if you go back 2 years before all of these guys started listing, the comparison used to be with China. I mean, at our brokerage house, we used to pitch PVR and Inox saying we only have 2,500 multiplex screens. China has 40,000. You're only selling so many clothes per capita. China is selling so many. Bata is only selling 1.6 footwear. China has 4x, 5x. So the comparisons will always shift. And a lot of this, like I said, the biggest issue, Shrija, is that you have now gone public. And I remember taking one of my first flights that I took of Indigo when it went public with investors. I actually saw that when the flight took off, these investors were just walking the aisle to sample how many leisure travelers, how many business travelers, talking to the air hostesses to understand, what is the turnaround time, the food. So the questions you ask once you go public are not the questions. I mean, you mentioned Byju's, he'll have a lot of answering to do when he comes public. Paytm has had to do
Scrutiny
that.
is higher. Scrutiny is very high.
Much higher, the pressure to profitability. Now, what happens is, let me talk about reverse migration. Let's say Zomato can't turn profitable beyond a point and itself gets disrupted. What happens is that proven players in the industry that were probably listed before time and are profitable may get the advantage of that, right? Let me give you a parallel example in quick service restaurants. You've had Burger King list, you've had Pizza Hut, you've had KFC, but you had McDonald's and Jubilant FoodWorks, which is Domino's, which are profitable. So if these guys can't turn profitable at some stage and show the return on equity or capital employed, that benefit is going to move away from them to here, right? As the great Gordon Gekko has said in the movie Wall Street, don't get emotional about stock. And that's what happens in the public markets. It's your and my, all of our phone monies. I'm sure, Anirudh himself is doing asset allocation. We have family offices as clients, but eventually when we put in our money, we also put in our money with these funds. So they're answerable to us. So they don't have to hold on to a stock because they love the promoter or they love the business. There's enough and more options available today. So I think, it's okay when you have so much money coming in. When the tap starts to run a little bit dry, that's, as they say, when the tide sort of starts receding, who's swimming naked, kind of a thing. So it will not continue indefinitely. It happened to the real estate bubble in 2007-8. How many real estate companies exist today? Of course, that's another matter with debt and all of that. But you could sort of take that to losses today. You had very good execution from companies back then. You probably have good execution today. But look at Paytm, right? It got disrupted by UPI in a very large way. So there is no saying that the disruptor can't be disrupted. And if that starts happening, and trust me, my two fellow panelists will identify those companies, and they will invest in those. And they will find reasons to justify those compared to where they've invested before, because that's just the way it works. I mean, if for good or bad, that's just the world of investing. Right? So, you can keep having this conversation about valuations till the cows come home, but from time immemorial, if you read Burton Malkiel's A Random Walk Down Wall Street and what's been happening for the last 500 years, when liquidity is flush, nobody asks the questions. I mean, just a very basic point, right, Shrija? The Nifty was 7,500. It went to 18,500. Not one person asked why it went to 18,500. Now 18,500 has become 17,000, and people are like, oh my God, what's happened? So it's, when the tap runs dry, you always test good companies in bad times. I'm not saying all these managements are bad, but they yet have to face the test of coming public. It's too soon to take that call. We are at the end of the buffet, Shrija. So Anirudh and Karthik are at the start of the buffet. They've, a lot of these are offered for sales. Not all of the money that's being raised is for the consumption of capital expenditure. A lot of it is because existing promoters want to sell out, and a few people are going to get rich and probably do their other startups. I worked with Ronnie Screwvala, so I know, how the man thought of his businesses, and the way he's done startups. So it's just different mindsets. It's not about who's right or wrong. It's just where you are in the value chain and who you're catering to. But to your specific question, I do believe the music will stop at some stage. It has in the past, and it will again in the future. It just has to, and it will.
Thanks for that. Anirudh, I sort of come to you. We just heard from Rahul that very definite that the music will stop, and perhaps soon, if I would say, just given the kind of signals we're getting from the Fed. One of course can never time all of this. Not the best experts in the world could potentially do it. And there's a lag between the private markets and the private markets valuation. We have always seen that. And private markets will take some time to adjust to the public market realities. But really, 41 unicorns this year. Let's talk about private markets also. Do you really think how much of that was warranted reality, and how much of that was a phenomenon of too much liquidity really playing the music too loud?
So I think 20%, 25% of these valuations could definitely be allocated to excess of liquidity, right? Because see, excess of liquidity for global investors was to allocate capital across the world. They obviously found something in India, which is why we've had a lion's share of that capital coming to us. However, I would like to also, one more point to be added here is that just because you become unicorn doesn't mean you made it, right? There's many unicorns that have also died, right? Now what the unicorn tag does to you, and this is something that we tell a lot of our founders very early, the higher the valuation, the more the expectation, right? Which means that you have to now justify this valuation in the next 12 to 18 to 24 months, right? And just because you got a fantastic unicorn valuation, you're worth 2, 3, 5, 10, 15, $20 billion, it means the next time you're raising money, you have to now justify whether the last valuation was right, and whatever you're asking above that, is that correct, right? And that is a game that becomes very, very tricky if you've raised a lot of money without having too much substantial revenues and other metrics that obviously growth investors look into in the longer term. Yes, you might get someone to put in 100 million, 200 million, make your unicorn at 1.5 billion, but you have to see some of that paperwork, right? That paperwork is almost like debt. If you do not justify that valuation in the next round, you're going, the founders are going to lose their shirt, right? And these are the kind of, sometimes, we don't really realize that that paperwork that is being signed, the SHAs, and Karthik, you've seen some of these in the unicorn rounds, right? They have literally tied the founder to say, whatever you promised, all the growth you've told us, if that does not pan out, right, then the founder is going to be liable to pay for some of that valuation, right? And that can become very, very tricky, especially if in the next round there's a down round or there's a flat round. It becomes very, very difficult for the founder in the long run. And then obviously the story also starts, coming apart at that point. So it's not, the unicorn tag is not the end of the road. That is just the start of the road at that point, right? The eventual ending of that road is usually a public market listing or an acquisition, right? And because that's the only way the guy valuing it at $1 billion is going to get liquidity back, and they want liquidity back. This money isn't there for you to keep for forever, right? At 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, at some point that money has to rotate back, and by that time you have to justify the cost of capital that you've taken on. and the valuation that you were given. And if none of those make sense to the investor at the exit, it's going to come back and hurt the founder.
So it can go the other way also, and in
So
very,
many
very
times
dangerous
it
ways
has
and very
so many
ugly
times.
ways.
It has so many times.
Okay.
Look at it. Whenever there's a down round, the person losing out is the founder.
Karthik, you want to add to that? We are the last thing on the music stopping and how much of the growth in the unicorn stage is really warranted. You heard from your colleague and your biggest endorser on the panel, Anirudh, that 25% of perhaps is owed to excessive liquidity. What about you? What do you think?
Yeah, so I don't know the percentage as such, but if I just look at the last 11 years of my journey in the VC itself, I've seen this cycle 2 times. And as you said, nobody can predict when it will stop, but everyone knows that it will stop sometime. And in each of those last 2 times when it has happened, Shrija, there is a blip for sure, but the next phase in which it picks up, it has actually been 2x. And you see that in the VC investments in India itself. When it happened in 2013 or so, from 2014 or 15, it became 2x in terms of annual investments. From 2019, it became 2x of what it was in 2017 or 18. So I think the key is, and as I said earlier, the market is expanding. And to that extent, some of these companies where there's a lot of money that flows in, and as Anirudh said and Rahul also said, if it doesn't justify that in terms of fundamentals, the investor is taking a dig out of believing in that opportunity over the next few years. And if that opportunity does not materialize, the investment just is a dead investment. And to that extent, the company suffers, and the employees and founder, everyone suffers. So clearly, unicorn tag and a lot of capital, if it is not yet justifiable, it has to result in the company turning profitable with that money, or getting ready to be able to raise the next round at a higher value in a finite time period, which means you really need to put that capital to work to actually be worthy of that valuation the next time.
The perpetually on a treadmill. The founder's perpetually on a treadmill, and you have to justify one valuation round to the other. Uh, very insightful conversation, and let's talk about some of the other technologies which seem to be becoming part of the constant narrative, especially in the newsrooms, much louder now. uh, every year there's one hype word, and I have seen this for so long. There was everybody wanted to invest in an e-commerce company, then came fintech, then came SaaS, the entire B2B phenomenon, and now everybody wants to be a crypto company, or let's say I'm the metaverse. Now this metaverse phenomenon or the metaverse hype, of course Facebook, one of the world's largest valuable, and credit to them to what they created in terms of the community and the platform, not just the tech lash they keep being subjected to from time to time. But what really is this metaverse phenomenon? I mean, are we really talking about a world where all of us would have a digital twin, and are VCs really that smart or dumb to actually fund those NFTs and people for the digital twins? I mean, are we really buying into that phenomenon, or is it something which we perhaps dumber people don't understand yet? I would sort of like to begin with you, Anirudh, on the entire metaverse phenomenon slash hype, what you make of it, and then get on to others. Yeah.
So I am not very well versed with metaverse, so I am probably dumber than the dumbest person that knows metaverse at this point. I usually rely on my founders to enlighten me on these things. So we haven't really seen too much of the metaverse in our inboxes. However, if we go back to the larger conversation of blockchain and cryptos, right? I think this is a technology that is here to stay, and usually, at least what my team and I have been able to achieve is that we usually invest in these things before they become the buzzwords, right? So when they become buzzwords, it's really good for the portfolio. In this sense, we've been very early investors in crypto, both at platform and at a coin level. We've done a few blockchain investments early on as well. Most of them have been from in the US and other ecosystems, not really much in India. I think we were always a bit concerned about how the RBI would view the
Yeah.
entire crypto investing space. So we've kept that capital outside. But I think many of these crypto coins, right? And I think even the Fed talked about the stable coin being actually something good for the fintech universe, for the fintech universe. I think these have some of them have a real use case, right? And like, many of these are actually solving the problem of what PayPal is doing, right? But PayPal charges 6% to transfer money between two countries, and they're trying to bring it down to less than 0.6%, right? And many of these guys, when they start solving such real world issues, there's
Mm-hmm.
actually a multi-trillion-dollar market that is there to be disrupted in the financial payment space. And I think, at least to me, I think there is a huge future in front of us, both in terms of blockchain and in terms of crypto. Thankfully, the government has also taken its time. They've not decided to come in with any kind of a crypto bill without giving every side a chance to have their say. And we expect that the government is going to come up with a bill which will allow certain forms of crypto to exist. Again, this is, I mean, and Rahul, I think we can go back to the 90s when this was the wild, wild west of the Indian stock market, when there was promoters starting companies, and there was satire videos made of companies with no actual factories or any kind of business IPOing. I think sort of crypto is in that space today. There's just 10,000, 12,000 coins out there. Not all of them are going to make it. Not all of them are real. There's probably about 50 to 100 use cases that really are going to make it out. And therefore, I think some bit of regulation is required. Some bit of sanity is required. It's not as easy as buying 100 rupee Bitcoin. It's not going to make you much money. But however, I think the government coming in and saying that we need to regulate this, and if the crypto players can come back and work with governments like the Indian government to make it work, there's a great future ahead for crypto and blockchain.
It's a good step that the government is actually talking about regulation in the crypto space. It actually provides some legitimacy to the entire conversation, some
Absolutely.
seriousness to it. Yeah. Any sort of 2 cents on the metaverse phenomenon from this panel? Any of you? Karthik or
Yeah,
Rahul?
just
Yeah.
one point to add. Again, I'm not an expert, but tracking the space and just going by some people who, like Bill Gates, who said that in 3 years, all of us will be doing our meetings in metaverse, and a Facebook example that you gave. So there's definitely something there. And recently, we were also doing some customer survey for one of my portfolio companies called Play Shifu, where kids who are in the age group of around 10 or so are all in this metaverse called Roblox. So there is something there, and the demographics is very different. And it's something to really keep an ear on. And today is the day where I see a generation shift between me and somebody who's just 6-7 years younger than me.
All
And
of
we're
us
talking
are.
about
All of us
and
are. I think we are
so then
just
we are
so
talking about
outdated.
that
Yeah.
age group who are many, many generations away. And if
Yeah.
they are believing in that, there is something there for us to keep a ear out there and see what exactly is there in that. And that's what early stage game is all about.
I think the philosophy stems from the fact that if you are building for the future, which VCs fund in, then you have to understand who that future consumer is. And that future consumer is not going to be you and me. That future consumer is perhaps my daughter and their daughters and their children. And if that technology is being developed now, I think it better be something which we perhaps don't understand and comprehend so well. Uh, Great then, and I think it's time for one last concluding remarks from all of you on 2021, how it has been before I get into the rapid fire. Yes, concluding remark. I'll start with you, Rahul, then Karthik, and then Anirudh. Yes,
So
quick sentence.
on a lighter note, Shrija, I think you can probably sum it up with the Devanand song, "मैं जिंदगी का ख्वाब निभाता चला गया, हर फिक्र को धुएं में उड़ाता चला गया." I think that's just the way to sum it up in terms of how many IPOs have come out, the valuations that they've come at. But I think it's just been phenomenal the way investors have lapped these up. I agree with both my co-panelists that these businesses are here to stay. There will be winners, there will be losers, but they will be tested in time to come.
Okay, Karthik.
Yeah, so I think it's in hindsight, it's been a fantastic year post a very troubled year of 2020, and clearly, I think there are more winners that are going to emerge because of 2021 than earlier.
Anirudh.
So I was going to come with another song, but I think I didn't have enough time to think through one that would probably summarize everything. But I think I've said this before. I think this literally I mean, Rahul talked about earlier about two events, right? That really set India up. I think there are two events in between that also set India up. One was GST, which made India into the largest single market in the world, right? And I think second one was Geo and reducing the rates of internet. India still today is the cheapest for 4G internet in the world, right? And we have massive consumption because of it. I think therefore all of these things just gave at COVID that perfect alt control delete moment. We got a chance to reset this economy, and now it's a completely digital economy that is growing at a very fast pace in the digital space. And therefore, I think 2030, right, not just 21, 2030, this entire decade is India's decade if we don't mess it up. Right, the only people that can screw up this opportunity, and whenever I'm fundraising, this is something that I tell my potential LPs that we've sold the India dream for 30 years, right? We told everybody since 1991 that we have so many shoes and so many screens and so many cars for all of India. I think 2021 was the first time we actually had performance to match the promise that we've been selling. People actually went out and bought stuff. There's companies like Wakefit that are doing hundreds of crores of turnover without having a single physical store out there, right? There's companies like, I would say Purple or Nika, right? Which are doing hundreds of crores of turnover without having as much of an in-depth distribution as was there before. So therefore, from here on out, the only people that can screw up this decade for India is the Indians itself, and starting with the Indian government and the Indian bureaucracy, and then obviously everyone from down there. If we can just keep this going for the next 6 to 7 years, I think 2030 India will be a very different India than what we've seen in the last 30 years.
That's well said. We don't need to sell the India story anymore. That is perhaps very, very well. And we have seen that 2021. I mean, it's almost like omnipresent that investors just keep wanting more and more of it. I mean, look at the amount of share of funds, the lion's share of funds that they've parked here. So I think the floodgates are open now, and I just hope that it continues.
I think it's a trickle. The floodgates are yet to open. We're still seeing a trickle of water, the water coming through.
Okay. So the question is, and I think Karthik, I'm going to put you on a spot here, rapid fire. You have to name the most overhyped unicorn in 2021.
Yeah, there are so many. To pick one is so hard.
Wow. So give me five. Give me five.
No, I really need to think about it, but no, I would just pick a name, just because you're putting me on a spot. Recently I saw this news of a company called Slice, where I heard, I haven't seen the details, but it's something which I pick for that bucket.
Okay. Anirudh, the most overhyped unicorn according to you?
Broom.
Okay.
I'm still yet to understand why that's a unicorn.
Okay, that's fair. Rahul, the most overhyped public unicorn according to you, the most overhyped public IPO according to you. What do you think?
I'll give you a disclaimer before that, Shrija. I think every entrepreneur, every promoter works hard, and how the eventual public market rewards or doesn't reward it is not in his or her hands. I do believe that if you're doing something entrepreneurial, you're giving it your best shot, and sometimes you succeed, sometimes you don't. But I think just in the context of the way the issues have panned out, I think you'd have to say that Paytm was a largely forgettable issue. I think with all the hype that it came through after the success that you saw, with a lot, I mean, just the preceding issue was Nika, and we saw at 1250 it went up to about 2000 plus. So I think there was a lot of promise. People were hoping that this would, Paytm changed so many things for us over the last 10 years. But I think in the context of the hype, I'd have to say that it was subdued. I'm not saying the story is over by any stretch, but I'm just saying since you asked for a relatively subdued one, I think in the context of capital markets, that was a bit of a letdown.
Okay. One question which I have in mind is, what would be your advice to a startup really starting out in 2022? Amidst all the hype and liquidity and funding frenzy, the metaverse phenomenon hanging on his or her head, the cryptocurrency overhang, what will be your advice? one advice for the startup founder?
So I would say nobody knows when it stops. Ride the wave. If you have a vision of what you want to build, sell that vision and raise money, but use it very judiciously.
Okay. Anirudh, if you were to name your anti-portfolio, what would that be for this year?
Anti-portfolio for this year. I think company. I think it's called Hoopla. It just got funded last week, which very interesting sort of. You can buy music on the fly for your videos and stuff. I thought that thing was a very interesting company. We just could not make the deal terms work between us. So yeah, definitely one that I would have loved to invest in.
Okay. One advice, Rahul, which you would have for founders of private companies, funded companies going for IPO in 2022, what would that be?
It's got to be retention of talent, and because it's becoming, I think one of the side effects of so much money and all of that is that salaries are becoming obscene, ESOPs and all of that, and you're actually finding that the founders are actually dissipating quite sooner than you actually expected them to, and we see that quite a bit. So I think retention of talent and adoption of digitization, I think if you're not going to have these two, it's going to be very tough to survive in the marketplace.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for such a lovely conversation. I had a great time talking to all of you and really reminiscing the year in review. And I'm absolutely sure it will be extremely worthwhile watch for our watchers and listeners for Mint 2. Thank you so much, Anirudh, Karthik, and Rahul. Till time I see you next, goodbye and good luck. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you, Srija.
Thank you.